How are you? This is Pastor Jason. I want to welcome you to our Good Friday edition of kind of reflections on Holy Week and what was going on in the life of Jesus. Wow, this is such a significant day in the calendar for Christians. Good Friday, where we reflect on and think about the crucifixion of Jesus. I certainly cannot begin to exhaustively cover the biblical material that's here. So I want to take just a moment, and I want to encourage you, maybe for the first time, if you've never done this, to go and read through the gospel narratives to really see all of the material that's there. It won't take you 25, 30 minutes to do that. But on the screen, I'm going to have the different places for you to read. I'm going to start in Matthew chapter 26, verse 36 through the end of chapter 27. And then if you go to Mark, you got chapter 14 starting in verse 32 all the way through chapter 15. In Luke, you start in chapter 22 verses 39 and you read through the end of chapter 23. And then you read John chapters 18 and 19. And so basically what you'll get is you'll get all of the biblical material that talks about and describes the narrative of what happens to Jesus on this Good Friday. I think it'll be a fantastic experience for you. Now, as you read that material, you're gonna see that there are so many things that are full of interesting details, that are full of significance. And I want you to try to put yourself in those stories. I want you to look at the characters. I want you to look at the decisions they made, what they didn't do, who said what, why did you think they did that? And I think it'll kind of come alive to you. There's so many things there. It kind of starts with the Garden of Gethsemane, where we have the experience of Jesus, that is so significant, where he prays to God and he says, Father, if it's possible, I'd like for this cup to pass from me, but not your will, but mine. And of course the disciples, they don't want to stay up with him. And we find there that as this moves forward, the story moves forward, Judas betrays Jesus with a kiss. Peter, wants to kind of fight, and Jesus calms him down. And this ultimately all leads to a series of episodes where Jesus is basically put on trial. And he goes from the high priests to Pilate, and from Pilate to Herod, and back to Pilate. And as he's moving through these episodes, they're trying to ask him questions, catch him in a trap, bring false witnesses. All of this is happening, and it's happening very, very fast. It's a very intense sequence of events. One of the things that I think we should remember here is none of this happened by accident. These people, especially the high priests and the religious leaders, they knew what they were doing, and they had a plan, and they had people in place. It wasn't just like this happened on a whim. And they took and they really wanted to conspire with Pilate and the governmental forces to make this happen, and that's what they did. And so at each one of these episodes, you'll notice that Jesus is punished, he's slapped, he's spit upon. We find out his beard is plucked out. They beat him, they whip him. At one point, they take a cat of nine tails and they lash it over him. They take a crown of thorns and they put it on his head. And that's kind of depicted in a movie many of us saw, The Passion of the Christ. And it's a horrific deal. And Jesus endures all of this suffering and this heartache, and you see that, especially in John's Gospel. Of course, from there, finally, Pilate, he's somewhat coerced because he doesn't have the courage to stand up for what he thinks. He condemns Jesus to die, and Jesus makes his way down what many of us know to be the Via Dolorosa to the Golgotha, or the place of the skull, where they take Jesus, and we know that they put him on a cross, and they nail him there, and they nail in his hands and his feet to the cross, and they string him up there, basically naked, with very little clothing on, humiliated, to suffer and die in shame and agony. I want you to just kind of get your mind wrapped around that for a minute. I mean, this is one of the, if not the darkest days in all of human history. God, through his infinite grace and mercy, has a plan to save humanity, and he comes to the earth as Jesus through his Son. And while he's here, what does he do? He helps people, he heals people, and he offers them hope. If you look at the message of Jesus, how can you not buy into that? He wants to help those who who are less fortunate. He wants to make things better. He's done all these good things, and how does humanity repay him for it? They nail him to a cross in a shameful death like nothing more than a common criminal. And so it's a very dark day in human history. As we look upon this, historians, even those who are non-Christian, can point to the fact that sure, a man named Jesus of Nazareth was crucified on a cross. Now, they may disagree about whether or not he was raised from the dead, but they don't deny that he, as a man, was crucified. Certainly, they can look to the influence that this person and his followers have had on human history. From the way our time is done, to the way governments are run, to our ethics. And so this is the most important figure in all of human history, this Jesus of Nazareth. But make no mistake, what he did on this Good Friday, what we celebrate, is hard for people to process. The Apostle Paul in 1 Corinthians chapter 1, verse 18, listen to what he says about this message. He says, the message of the cross, that message that God comes to the earth as a man, crucified on a cross to pay the price for the sins of humanity. That message is foolishness to those who are perishing. And listen, we don't need to get upset. We don't need to be belligerent or get mad. The Apostle Paul tells us in the Scriptures that to those who are perishing, to those who do not know God, to those who do not have faith in Christ, to those who do not recognize their own need for salvation, this message is foolish. And I can understand, because if you don't embrace it internally, it's hard to get your mind wrapped around this concept. But look, to those of us who are being saved, Paul says, it is the power of God. You see, as Christians, when we celebrate this Easter and we reflect upon Jesus' crucifixion, what we need to do is take a few more moments thanking God for the sacrifice that he made through Jesus on our behalf. What he did for us, what he endured for us, not just the physical, but the emotional and the mental anguish for you and I. And while we're thanking him, let's take a few moments today and say a prayer for those who may not yet know him. You see, to many, some who are watching this today, to others that we know, they have not yet embraced the forgiveness offered to them through Jesus. And to them, the message of the cross is foolish. It's outlandish. It makes no sense. Don't try to argue with them. Pray for them, because when they become aware of their own sinfulness and their own great need for salvation offered to them through Jesus' sacrificial death on the cross, it will begin to make sense. And at that point, it can become the power of God in their life, as it hopefully is in ours. As we think about Easter and we begin to prepare, I look forward to talking with you again tomorrow. God bless.